So this is what PADI is about. And it takes it one step further by allowing you to port address translate arbitrary ports from the outside to the inside. And I'm using that port that I have mentioned here, right? It's like VNC on port 5001 on this particular IP address. So if I open this up, I'm getting directly connected through to that desktop machine that runs inside of my lab by connecting to the IP address of my CML controller, right? So that is...
now that, I like that, man. I really like this. This is much easier for a lot of people, yeah. Hey everyone, it's David Bombal back with Ralph. Ralph couldn't make it to Cisco Live this year, so we're doing this just before Cisco Live. Ralph, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, David.
It's great to have you back, man. You've been showing me this tool offline, and I'm really excited to share it with everyone. Could you talk about this? I think it's called PADI. Is that right? This tool?
Yeah, that's the name that it came into my mind. So PADI is a little tool that's installed on top of CML. It comes with 2.6 as the base installation. Like it's included in 2.6. It will not be enabled by default. So if you want to use it, you have to enable it in the services. But it's pretty simple to enable, and it allows you to do some like breakout or onboard breakout thing that hasn't been possible before. So you can completely forget about a breakout if you want to use this tool. It has some pros, it has some cons. The pros are that you directly can connect to your devices based on some tags that you attach to nodes and specify some ports where you want to reach these devices. So it's really simple to set this thing up using tags on nodes. On the downside is that it doesn't need any authentication. It doesn't require you to use any encryption. But for some use cases, if you run this on your local laptop, like where everything is local anyway, or if you run this within your lab and you are on the same lab segment with your laptop, you might not really care. I wouldn't recommend using this like on the internet where you have like unencrypted traffic via telnet to your console devices. And so that's not something that I would recommend. But otherwise, you might find this useful if, as I said, if you run something local and you want to really quickly connect to a device.
So for everyone who's watching, I've seen this. It's a great tool. I am so glad that Ralph is sharing this. So glad that he's created this. But there's more. That's kind of the theme of this video. Originally, that's not what we were going to do. But Ralph has shared some extra stuff. So just to interrupt the video, sorry. There's more stuff coming in this video. So I hope you enjoy it. So Ralph, enough talking. Let's see the demo.
I'm logging in here. And I have a lab running in here, which is pretty simple. It's just like a switch and a couple of nodes. I'll show you that in a second. But the thing here that I want to emphasize on, or like that I want to demonstrate here, is this PADI thing. PADI stands for port address translation, TTY basically. So it's kind of a onboard breakout thing, and allows you to translate ports from the outside to the inside. So in the previous version, and also with other products, you can directly connect to consoles and to VNCs and whatnot directly by pointing your client to the IP address of CML, or like the host that runs those VMs, and connect directly through, right? That has been disabled, or that has not been implemented in CML for security reasons, because you want to have authentication and you want to have encryption and all these things, and telnetting to a console port without having any authentication is kind of a security problem. And that is still kind of, like my opinion, it should still be this way. But we heard from people that this is kind of inconvenient, especially if you run like on your local machine or like within your local lab and you want to expose these things and don't care about like encryption and these kind of things. So this is what PADI is about. And it takes it one step further by allowing you to port address translate arbitrary ports from the outside to the inside, and both for TCP and UDP. So you could say, I want to expose this port, let's say 22, on my CML host so that I can SSH to that particular port, and it will be switched back into my lab to connect through to that device or that port, whether this is SSH or VNC or whatever, SNMP or whatever you can imagine, right? So that doesn't really matter. We actually wanted to have that, or we want, that's still the plan. We want to have that in a more comprehensive way, where we want to configure these kind of things also for multiple users and so on and so forth. Right now, this is kind of it's a Debian package that is installed onto the CML controller, and it runs like in the background, and it does these things by pulling information from the controller and doing the stuff like IP tables manipulation and all of these other things in the background. So that's how it currently works, and it's kind of very simple by using tags on a node, and a tag is just a text string, right?
Okay.
And we do have some syntax or some context put into these tags and saying, okay, so if I put in pad colon and then an outside port and an inside port, that's basically the instruction for this tool to do these things. And the same goes for serial ports or VNC ports if that is being enabled. And this is what PADI is all about. Like, it's just to make you alive as a user easier by putting in these tags into your topology. So you could say, okay, on my router 1, it's always going to be 2001. That telnet port 2001 of my CML host gets me to router 1 on this port. Now, the problem there is that if you have multiple of these labs running with multiple of the same tags, you get a clash. So there's obviously a shortcoming. But if you're like the only person, or if you have like like some sort of a map or some sort of ruling, like user 1 gets 2000 to 3000, user 2 gets 3000 4,000 or something like that, right? You can work around these things, but there's obviously some limitations, right? So that's kind of the concept behind it.
Yeah. So let me see if I understand right. The problem is people want to be able to connect to a lab just by SSHing to the IP address of CML, and then they want to end up like, say, port 2001, and they want to end up on the console of a router like router 1. In the past, we had to use the breakout tool, right? And that was like a bit of setup. But by just adding these tags, I could say port 2001 on it's like a NAT translation, right? It's like on the outside goes to port 23 on this router, or to the serial of this router. Is
Correct.
That kind of right? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So the breakout tool still works and it's still there, but it's a different approach to give you the same thing. It has pros and cons, right? It has the big benefit is for the user that, I can just use my tooling pointed to this machine. I always know that like for whatever my convention is, 2001 goes to router 1, 2002 goes to router 2. So you have that kind of mapping, and it's a no-brainer. The drawback is there is no authentication. There is no encryption. If you just open it up as a telnet port, for example, to your console or VNC, there are obviously some drawbacks there.
I think for a lot of people, though, it's a lab. So, like, who cares? And like you said, if it's local, it's like on my local laptop, who cares? Yeah.
So that's the intention, right? And
yeah, that's great. No, I like that. That's great.
Let's jump into the demo, and you will see. I mean, this is part of the new UI. You can see like things have changed, like
nice.
How things are being added. And the big thing down here is that we have now what we call panes. But the thing here is, on this guy here, I have some tags defined. You see like VNC 5001 and pad 5022 to port 22. So if you open my terminal, so you see like this IP address up here is my CML controller, right? By the way, this thing runs in AWS, right? So
oh, great.
So I'm using the same IP address here, and I'm using that port that I have mentioned here, right? So like VNC on port 5001 on this particular IP address. So if I open this up, I'm getting directly connected through to that desktop machine that runs inside of my lab by connecting to the IP address of my CML controller, right? So that is
now that I like that, man. I really like this. This is much easier for a lot of people. Yeah, sorry, go
on. And the other thing, or like the other one that I could show you here is if I go to this guy, like this should be my switch here, right? So I have my switch has the serial port mapped to port 5000 on my controller here using this tag. So if I do this, I get directly to my switch and can log in to my switch.
That's great. No, I like that. I think it's a lot logic. It's much easier for a lot of people than the breakout tool. This is like, I know it's you're lowering your security, but it's functionality, it's ease of use, right?
Right. And it's a matter of choice. Like the thing gets installed on 2.6 by default. but it's not enabled by default. So you would have to go in as an admin and enable that service and configure the service. Like the configuration of the service by default is only allowing for PAT, like the port address translation, to come into these devices, right? If you want to do like the VNC and the serial console thing, that would actually be another, conscious decision on your end to enable that thing, because, as I said, no authentication, clear text, and all of that stuff. If you do this like I do it right now over the internet, that's certainly not something that I would recommend, right? But if this runs on your laptop, or if this runs within your lab and you're like on the same network segment, it really isn't that much of a concern. But it gives you the idea that you have this capability, like it's a convenience thing. Let's put it this way.
No, I think it's great. I mean, I always get this thing about people complaining about security when it's a lab, and it's like, guys, it's a lab. This thing's going to be torn down in a week or in 2 days. It doesn't matter. But I mean, I think that's a decision everyone has to make for themselves.
Right. Exactly.
So how do you set it up? So if you deleted that switch serial option,
well,
do you just click on the device and then create it, or create another one?
Like a new lab, right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
So I'm going ahead and add an external connector. I add a let's just say an unmanaged switch, and I add a desktop here, this guy, and then add link. And there are some gotchas, or like some caveats, right? So for this to work, these guys need to have an IP address on the outside, like at least for the PAT thing. For the port address translation thing, if I want to have some IP traffic, then I need to have an IP address that is that is visible on the CML controller. And that also means that this only works, and it only makes sense if this runs behind NAT, like behind this network address translated network. If you put things on a bridge, I mean, there's no need to do it because you've exposed these guys anyway. So it's only making sense if you put them behind a network address translation device, which is the default for these guys. So like if I go in here and say
config. So are you saying that would be like a management network, right? Because you're going to get access to the consoles of those devices, and then you'd build your lab.
If it's about the serial or the VNC thing, then it doesn't matter, because that's a different thing. If I want to have IP connectivity to the device, then I would have to hide it behind the network address translation external connector. If it's just about the serial consoles, that doesn't matter. So that works anyway.
So let's say you deleted that Ethernet link between the unmanaged switch and the switch.
Yeah.
Could you set it up before you do that? Just boot the switch up and get direct console access.
Yeah, you can. What you're saying? So let's just delete this guy.
Okay, yeah, let's delete that just so that we can prove it, and then
then I go in here, and by the way, we can start these guys right away, because start lab, I didn't have any configuration at all on those, so that doesn't really matter. So what I need to do here is I go to settings, and I have this tags here, right? And this is just arbitrary strings. It's free form basically. So I could put in whatever, David, and I have a tag David in here, right? Doesn't really matter.
Okay.
But if I put in a specific string, like it looks for the pattern matches these things, right? Let's say serial, and then I say the port number that I want to have, let's say 3000, right? So, and that's the unique thing. You need to remember what you put where and what's running in parallel at the same time. I can also do like, ::1 if I want to have like not the port 0, which is the console, if I want to go to the aux port or some other serial device. But so that's all that I do need. And then I can go back to this guy. So the thing is, as I said before, it takes a little bit of time because it's a polling mechanism. So it looks what's running and it looks what needs to be configured. So it takes a bit of time. Let's see, serial. Okay, so I created this tag here on this switch device here. So if I connect to port 3000, I will connect actually through to the serial port here on this IOSV device, iOS layer 2 device. And you see I'm connected, and I hit return.
Yeah, that's
right. And this is my switch that I have running up here. And I can actually, let's see, if I click on this guy and open console and connect to the console, and go back here, I see the same thing, right? I could do enable if I type. And
that's great.
And the same goes for, let's say, this guy over here. If I do here tags and say VNC on port 3010. So I have now another tag defined, which says I should be able to connect. Let's go out here and do the VNC on port 3000. What did I say? 10? 10. Yeah. And I get directly connected to this other guy. So this is the serial and the VNC connectivity that I provide without having any outside connectivity. It's just by connecting to the IP address of my controller and to a specific port.
I mean, that's great, because that's what I think most people are going to want it for. You literally just create a tag. That's a great demo. So what are the tags? It's serial, a VNC.
This is the stuff over here. So I can do like serial, just the port, or serial and the port and the line number if I have multiple lines on a switch, or I can do VNC and then the port number that it should be listening on, right? So this is for device connectivity. This is basically what the breakout tool gives you. And then the other thing is the port address translation capability, which allows you to map a port on the outside, on the IP address of the controller, to a port on a device that runs inside of a lab by providing these mappings in here. And this works for TCP and it works for UDP. By default, it uses TCP because that's usually, I guess, what most people want. If this is like RDP or VNC or SSH or SNMP and whatnot, SNMP would be UDP. And the just to be perfectly clear here, the requirement here really is that the device that you want to connect to needs to be visible on that network that is located like on a network segment that is hosted by the CML controller. So let's say if this would be a routing device and you have a device behind it, then this guy would pick up, or like is configured for an IP address that is limited to this segment here, right?
Yeah.
And that IP address would never show up on the Linux host that runs CML.
Yeah.
So that's the prerequisite, or that's the requirement that we do have here. But otherwise, it's kind of super flexible to give you that kind of direct connectivity into a lab.
I love that, because I mean, for me, as soon as you say stuff like that, it's like, okay, this is as if this is a real Cisco router, and I just have to make sure I do my NAT or PAT Well, it's basically static NAT on a Cisco router properly, which means I need to have IP connectivity from that NATing device, which is your NAT access device with the static NATing mappings to the internal devices. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think for everyone watching, I don't know if you agree, but for me, you just pretend the NAT access device is like a router where you're running dynamic NAT to get outside and then static NAT to get in. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. And it's a convenience thing. And it's
great. Now, I love the fact that you can do sorry to interrupt, the VNC and the serial without doing anything else. Because that means I can run my whole lab internally with no external access and just provide access to the console. It's as if you've given me, like, Ralph, I'm old, so 2500 Cisco router with, console cables.
Fair now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's what it's like, right?
Yeah.
But and how many connections can I have? Is it just limited by like 60,000 or something, 65,000?
Yeah, it's actually less. I think it's configurable.
Can you go back to your demo? Can you show us how to enable the service?
Oh, yeah, I can. So that's how you do it. You go to your controller and go to port 9090, which is the cockpit part for system administration. And then you log in here and go to services and then type PADI up here. And you see that PADI at this point is already enabled, right? And you can also see in the logs down here when it does stuff. So like when you have a conflict, or when you have used the same port in two labs, then obviously there's a conflict, because you can only have one process listening on a single port. So that would be shown in here. So this is how you enable it. There is a configuration file, sudo vi etc default PADI. And this has the things like, this is usually, or this is by default disabled, like commented out. So I edited in here manually so that the VNC and the serial device access is enabled.
But I don't have to do that as a normal user. I can just click the little box, right? And then
the VNC and serial port enabled thing is something that you need to do, because by just enabling it, that is, in my opinion, that would be too insecure to allow.
So I have to check that little box, and then I have to open this file and then uncomment that OPTS.
The other way around. You need to go in here, change this thing so that it reflects the setting in here that you also have VNC and serial enabled, and then tick the box and say you have enabled the service to pick up the change. Otherwise, you can always restart the service and these kind of things. So that's not a big deal. But this is the setting that I currently have enabled. Yeah, so that's that.
So it's etc default paddy.environment, right?
Correct. Yeah,
Great.
down here. So this thing on AWS, just to not confuse people, on AWS, since this is a bare metal instance on AWS, we don't have a bridge device. So this is the reason why this shows up. So by default, it would use bridge 0, which is like available on all OVA installations. So this part here isn't really needed.
So just to help me, because I'm slow, you've got OPTS commented out. So if I was just running this on my VM on my laptop, I would just uncomment that file and I'll be good to go? Or do I have to write that extra line?
So like,
okay,
what the thing comes with is basically it looks like this, right? And I think it says, like, the default says up here, it says warning, right? So what you could do as a user, and if you want to have the serial ports and the VNC ports enabled, you just go in here and remove
that's
command,
save the file,
and
start the service,
and then you should be good to go.
That's great. But hold on, there's more. Ralph shared some stuff that I'm going to add to the video right now before we wrap this up. Ralph, tell us about this new GitHub thing that you haven't shared. Come on, man.
Okay, so then there's one more.
There's more. Okay, great. Well,
there's one more, which is something that I'm also. There is a Terraform provider that I've created, and within the Terraform provider, which is actually like on the HashiCorp registry for Terraform, right? That allows you to completely automate the entire flow or life cycle of a simulation. So basically, you define infrastructure as code using Terraform. Say, I want to create a lab. I want to create nodes within my lab. I want to create a link between nodes in my lab. I want to provision this configuration inside of my lab. I want to start the entire thing. I want to start the thing in stages where I say I could go from core over distribution to access. If I have a really big lab, you won't start everything at the same time. So you want to have some kind of control over the life cycle when things are being started. So all of that is possible by using the Terraform provider. So if I go, let's say Terraform CML2, there's actually a blog post that I've written, and then there are some other YouTube videos about this thing, but this is the one that I'm talking about. So it has documentation, and you can see, let's see, resources, let's say life cycle. You can do like these things, like, you have a resource that is called CML2 lab, it can provide title, description, etc. And then do node definition, or define this is a node that goes into this lab. It should go have this configuration, and you can even place it on the topology by providing X and Y coordinates if that's important to you. You can provide these tags, like the tags that we just talked about in that Paddy tool. You can provide that as part of the Terraform thing. And in combination with the AWS thing, you can have your complete life cycle, bring up a CML instance in AWS, have it configured, all automated. Then if it's done and ready, then deploy this lab, create these nodes, run these tests, maybe as part of Terraform, or if you combine that with Ansible going forward and say use PyATS, for example, to do some automated testing, bring down the lab, remove the license, bring down the entire CML node, and done. And all of this is fully automated.
I feel like it's like a sales pitch, but there's more. I love it. I love
There's one more thing.
Is there one more thing?
Well, then that's it for today, I guess.
No, that's brilliant.
But the other thing that I did write up is a blog post about this thing, which is this one. So this is talking about the Terraform provider and how you would use it, how you get Terraform and install the provider and get started. So that's basically this blog post here.
No, that's great. I'll put all the links below for everyone who's watching. Ralph, I see some videos on CML. Is there any ones that you recommend? I see there's a one there that says deploying CML2 labs with Terraform.
Yeah,
is that a good video?
Yeah, Dan did a good job on this one. Yes.
Ralph, that's fantastic. I'm really glad that you showed this. When we were talking offline, I wasn't quite sure what the tool was about, and I think this demo. And just for everyone who's watching, put in the comments below if you agree. I thought this was a fantastic demo, and I think it's a great addition to CML. So, Ralph, thanks so much for sharing.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to show some of this content, because I even internally, it's kind of difficult for people to like I put this out internally for our own folks, and it didn't get a lot of momentum because I guess it really requires this kind of explanation what it does,
Yeah.
and like to get that light bulb moment where people
Exactly.
actually like understand like what's it good for, why would I even use it, right? So thanks for giving me this opportunity.
No, great demo. Thanks, Rolf.